Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum, brothers and sisters. I hope everyone is well, inshallah. So in today's seminar session, we're going to be looking at, or we're going to be covering the topic, God is not dead, Islam's response to nihilism. And more than a response, guys, I want us to see it today as Islam's solution to nihilism, because Islam absolutely is a solution to this problem that we're facing today and that many people are experiencing, and unfortunately many Muslims are experiencing too, a type of nihilism, although they're Muslim, and we'll probably touch upon this at some point during this live session, inshallah. So that's the topic today, and let me start off, walaikum salam to Beehive Pattern. Let me start off by making another proclamation, because we're going to be looking at a specific proclamation by a specific philosopher in a little while. But let me start off with a proclamation, and that is that God is not dead. God can never die. And one of the reasons, at least for this, is because we as human beings are in need of God. We can't function without God. Society cannot function without God. The world cannot function without God. The idea of God has been central to humanity throughout history. Without God, there has never been a civilization, and there never will be a civilization, a purely godless civilization. And the reasons are simple. I mean, I've covered this many times in many other lives, and we don't need to get technical with this. The reasons are simple. Without God, we can't make sense of the most fundamental things that we require as human beings to make sense of us and the world around us. We can't make sense of ultimate meaning. We can't make sense of objective morality. We can't make sense of the world around us, the purpose of our life and our life within this world. We can't make sense of any of these things. And without these fundamental things, you can't have civilizations. You can't have flourishing societies. You can't even have an individual that grows and flourishes. You have nothing. And we're going to explore this a bit further, inshallah. But let me just shift the screen so you guys can see the slides as well, inshallah. And what we'll do, guys, once we've gone through this, it's about half an hour of the presentation, then we'll do an extensive Q&A, inshallah. Because the whole idea of these live seminars is to make this as interactive as possible, inshallah, and to get your questions and engage with them. By the way, we've done a recorded series on this very topic, inshallah, which will be coming out over the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out on that on the Sapiens Institute YouTube channel. And before I continue, walaikum salam to everyone that's joining us now. So let's start with this particular statement. God is dead. Who knows where this is from, or who said this? Who can tell me? Let's see in the question in the comment section. Who made this specific statement? I'm sure all of us have heard it. Many atheists refer to this. Anyone? Nietzsche. Okay, mashallah. So Abu Jackson is correct. Nietzsche made this specific statement and said much more. But we normally focus in on this specific statement. In the Gay Science, in his parable of the madman, he made, or we recall this statement where he said, God is dead. And normally what ends up happening is many atheists take this statement and they are very proud, get very excited, and, highlight this as if, look, Nietzsche is stating God is dead. Nietzsche was an atheist. Okay, there's no doubt in that. He was an atheist and he died that way. However, Nietzsche was what I would say an intelligent atheist, right? He was someone that actually thought about the question of God and thought about the significance of believing in God or denying the existence of God and the impact that would have on humanity. He actually gave these things a lot of consideration, and we're going to look at this in some detail in a few moments. But when he made this specific statement, he was not making an atheist proclamation. As a proud atheist today, for example, Richard Dawkins or Sam Harris would turn around and say, God is dead. He wasn't making this statement in this particular way. If we look at that specific passage and spend some time, a few moments of really going over this. And this is a section of the particular parable of the madman from the Gay Science. There are some very interesting things in this passage. Now, as a preface to this, consider and keep in mind, guys, that Nietzsche was someone who was an existentialist philosopher. He was someone who really focused in on the meaning of life, nihilism, how there is no meaning to life if you acknowledge his position, which he maintained as an atheist, that he didn't acknowledge that there was a God or a creator behind all of this. So he was someone that thought about these things. He really thought deeply about the implications of not believing in God. And this was evident throughout his works. Now, considering all of this, when we read this passage, something very interesting comes across. And let's just go through it now. So in this passage, he starts by saying, "Where has God gone?" He cried. "I shall tell you, we have killed him, you and I. We are his murderers. But how have we done this?" Now, I want you to pay attention specifically to this sort of bolded text here. "How were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon?" Now, straight away, we can see that there is an element of removal here, which has been emphasized. Removing something. God is dead. We have killed God, but this is also leading to us removing something. It's removing something from us. And then it continues. "What did we do when we unchained the earth from its sun?" Now, this is a very interesting statement or question. What did we do when we unchained the earth from its sun? So it's almost, because if you think about the idea, the planets in our solar system are held within or maintain their position because the gravitational pull of the sun itself. So the sun is that center, the gravitational center, and it keeps the planets within their orbits. Now, here is an idea of the earth being unchained, separated from the sun. Now, obviously, the passage is to do with God, and I believe that this sun he's referring to, it's almost representing God here, and the earth may be representing human beings. Now, the idea that's coming across it, and think about it, what would happen if the earth was to leave its orbit and fall out of the gravitational sphere or area of influence of the sun itself? What would happen? The earth would float around in space, in space, in any direction without any, control. It will just float around in empty space, literally, without any specific direction. And then he elaborates further. So he says, how were we able to drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What did we do when we unchained the earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving now? Away from all suns. Away from all suns, are we not perpetually falling? Backward, sideward, forward, in all directions? And he's asking these questions. And again, when you read these points, away from all suns, are we not perpetually falling backward, sideward, forward? This is emphasizing a loss of direction. This is emphasizing a loss of control. Losing your bearings, as we would say. This is what he's emphasizing here. And this is linked to the idea of the death of God, the idea of the death of the idea of God itself. And then he says, is there any up or down left? Has it not become colder? Is it not more and more night coming? Oh, sorry, I think there may be something missing here. Isn't there not more and more night coming on all the time? Must not lanterns be lit in the morning? Now, I've specifically highlighted this particular part of the passage. Must not lanterns be lit in the morning? So the idea of darkness is this darkness is creeping in. The way it's getting cold, it's empty, it's without direction. We're losing our bearings. This is the idea. This is the idea that comes across from this particular passage. And then he says, "Must not lanterns be lit in the morning?" Almost as if suggesting, don't we need to replace the space of the sun now? Don't we need to replace that with what's the best we could do? Lanterns, these little devices that give us temporary light for a little bit, and then they go out. And if they're oil lanterns, as soon as the oil runs out, the lantern goes out. These temporary little lights, that, yeah, if you think about lanterns, if you go back in olden days, you'd use lanterns. There people would use lanterns to, navigate their way at night when there were obviously no street lamps at the time. And it was very small amount of light which will come from these lanterns. They will go out. So what are these lanterns? I want you to keep this in mind for a second. We'll discuss these lanterns, or what I believe is being referred to as lanterns, alternatives to God. So, and obviously then you see in blue, God is dead. That is what we normally hear about, and that's what we normally focus on. So essentially, if you really take the time to study this passage, what comes across is that Nietzsche wasn't really making this sort of proud, boastful atheist proclamation that God is dead. He was actually warning people. This madman in this parable is actually warning people of this really difficult situation that we're about to face because we've killed God. In other words, we've turned away from God. Because we've rejected God and we've turned away from God, our faces away from God, we are heading towards some really difficult times where we will have no clue as to what's going on. We will lose our bearings. We will look for alternatives, small lanterns, anything that will give us some light, some direction. This is what he was highlighting. And he was essentially pointing people or reminding or telling people, warning people that there is, because we've turned away from God, and this whole turning away from God, without getting into too much detail, this is something we cover in the recorded course, you can say really began to be put into practice at the time of the Enlightenment, where there was a shift in the thinking of people. The thinkers of the time, what they wanted people to do was to focus on the material world as opposed to the hereafter. Professor Leo Damrosch, for example, in one of his courses on the Enlightenment, he highlights that this was where people were shifted. Their focus was shifted from the vertical plane to the horizontal plane. So people were made to turn away from the idea of a hereafter and working for a hereafter and attaining paradise, and were made to now focus on the here and now. And they were given a new objective, a new purpose, which was to, create paradise on earth, have this type of worldly utopia. So people were given a new objective in the Enlightenment. And although, as many of the academics have acknowledged, if you were to go to the Enlightenment philosophers and thinkers and ask them, are you an atheist? Do you not believe in God? Most of them wouldn't say this. Most of them would acknowledge God. And we're talking about the 18th century here. They would acknowledge God, but they were shifting away from the sort of traditional concept of God and, religion, as in particular Christianity, and were moving towards what they refer to as natural theology. So hence they were, the scientific revolution took place at the same time. And the early scientists, those behind the scientific revolution, were also people that believed in God. However, they didn't, again, believe in a traditional concept of God. They believed God has created everything, and God has created everything with order. And we are simply our job is to study this order. That's there, right? So initially there wasn't a complete rejection of God, but it laid the foundations for what we now see as new atheism, naturalism, materialism, etc. Now, at the time of Nietzsche, by the time he comes around, obviously atheism and godlessness and naturalism and all of these philosophies were more rampant. So he was someone that studied this and understood this, and he saw the adverse effects of this, the consequences of people turning away from God and focusing, becoming more materialistic. And nihilism was an inevitable consequence of this reality. And we're going to go into nihilism and discuss nihilism a bit more. But before we do that, I want to draw attention to a very powerful ayah of the Quran. This is found in the 59th chapter, verse 19, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and do not be like those who forgot Allah, so He made them forget themselves. It is they who are the truly rebellious. وَلَا تَكُونُوا كَالَّذِينَ نَسُوا اللَّهَ فَأَنْسَاهُمْ أَنفُسَهُمْ أُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْفَاسِقُونَ. This is a very powerful ayah, brothers and sisters. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling us here, don't be like, and remember, this is over 1400 years ago, right? This is not 18th century, 17th century, 16th century. Over 1400 years ago, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is informing us and telling us, don't be like those people who forgot Allah. And because of they turning away from Allah, Allah made them forget themselves. They lost their own sense of awareness, who they are, what they are. And they are the ones who are truly rebellious. Now, this ayah can be, there are many things we can take from this. The scholars, the Mufassirin, when they've commented on this ayah, something predominantly they mention is, well, what's obvious? Well, if you don't know who Allah is, if you don't know who your creator is, and you turn away from God, Well, then you don't really know who you are, what your purpose is, why you're here, what the objective is. There's no way of understanding what the human is. You'll just end up concluding, well, you're just a more highly evolved animal, but regardless, an animal. And, you would not know who you are, what the objective of this life is. What are we doing here in this 80, 90 years that we have on this earth? We won't know. So you won't know, and therefore you won't fulfill the purpose of your life, and you'll lose yourself completely. But what's really interesting here, another point which I found which was very interesting, is that the word nasya itself that's used here in this particular ayah. The word nasya, nun sin ya, nun sin waw, it's a very interesting forgetting. It's the type of forgetting which is deliberate. That's what it signifies. It's the type of forgetting where one is deliberately, consciously turning themselves away from the truth or something, trying to forget something that they know it's there. It's not this sort of innocent type of you just forgot something. We're forgetful as human beings. It's not that type of forgetting where you just had to remember something, forgot it, and that was that. This is a deliberate type of forgetting. And even if you look at, for example, Lane's lexicon, and even in the Mufradat, the Sheikh mentions this too, but this is a very interesting point. He's in the lexicon, we find that it's a type of pretending that he had forgotten it, or he constrained himself to dismiss it from his mind. So it's a deliberate, intentional turning away. And this is very interesting, considering the fact that we know, and you guys have probably covered this in many other seminars, considering the concept of the fitrah, that the belief in God is natural, it's innate, it's there. Now, if the fitrah is there, and we have this innate recognition of the creator, which is acknowledged by many psychologists today, Justin O'Barrow, Oliver Petrovich, that we have this innate almost wiring to believe in God, in a creator, a cause, then obviously when we turn away from God, we have to make some effort. It's not going to be easy. It's not natural. So I thought it was very interesting. It's very precise use of words here that Allah uses. It's a deliberate forgetting. It's a conscious forgetting. So it's almost like, if you had a toothache and you wanted to forget it because you can get on with your day, that's the type of forgetting. It's inside your mouth. You can't get rid of it. It's there. It's inside you. So that would be nasya, where you're trying to turn away from that toothache and trying to deliberately forget about it so it doesn't ruin your day, as opposed to, say, you had to make a call and you forgot. It's something external. Other things happened, you forgot. But the toothache is within you. It's inside. So that would be nasya. So it's a deliberate turning away. And Dr. Isar Ahmed made a very interesting point in his tafsir of this particular ayah as well. He said, what is meant by someone forgetting themselves? It's not that they're forgetting to take care of themselves. I mean, because even atheists know this. He mentioned that, non-believers would know that they have to feed themselves, and they have to, wash themselves, and they have to take care of their physical bodies and exercise. So when Allah is speaking about that they were made to forget themselves, it's not that they were made to forget their physical selves and their physical needs. It's that they were made to forget their essence, their true selves, their inner selves, the lub of the human being, the essence of the human being, which is the soul. The inner selves, what really matters. So there's many ways we can look at this, but I think what's very interesting from today's perspective, considering what we just spoke about, Nietzsche and his perspective on, how turning away from God, or the idea of killing God, leads to confusion and leads to one losing their bearings and not understanding anything. This is very interesting. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reminding us of this reality as well, that if you turn away from God, if you forget your creator, you will forget yourself. And one way of looking at this is that you won't know who you are. What is the ultimate thing? And let's think about this now. Let's do this experiment now. Imagine for a second that, there is an atheist present amongst us, and he says that there is no God, there is no creator. And that's what I believe. That's what he says. Now, imagine asking him the question. Say you ask him the question, what is the ultimate meaning of your life? What is the ultimate purpose of your life? Think about this. Can he give you an answer to that question? Is there an answer to that question? The answer is no. And here's why. Because when you say there is no creator, there is no cause, what you're saying, in other words, is that the entire universe and everything that exists is one big accident. It's a random phenomenon. It's a random occurrence. There's nothing behind it. There is no order behind it. There is no intentionality behind it. There is no reason for it to exist. It just happened. Like spilt milk. It happened. Now, accidents don't have a purpose, at least according to their perspective of things. As Muslims, obviously, we believe everything has a purpose. Everything has a reason. But according to them specifically, accidents don't have a purpose. If it's one big accident, there is no meaning or purpose behind it. Now, if there's no meaning and purpose behind the universe, then that also means that there is no ultimate meaning or purpose behind the things within the universe. And that includes you and me and everyone, human beings. That means our lives are ultimately meaningless and have no purpose. This is an inevitable conclusion, an inevitable consequence of denying a creator God. If you are someone that says there is no God, you can never account for the ultimate meaning and purpose of life. Okay. Now we're going to explore this a bit further and really sort of get to the bottom of this. So what is nihilism? If I was to give you a general, if you look at the dictionaries and if you go through the sort of definitions of nihilism, one thing that emerges from all of these definitions is nihilism is the idea of there being no meaning. Okay, there being no meaning, no reason behind a particular thing. Now, there's many ways academics have categorized nihilism. So, for example, Donald A. Crosby in his book Spectre of the Absurd, he's given 5 categories of nihilism: moral nihilism, epistemological nihilism, cosmic nihilism, existential nihilism, political nihilism. But one thing that comes across is all of these types of nihilism are interlinked. They're linked with each other. And some have even said that moral nihilism, political nihilism, epistemological nihilism, and cosmic nihilism all come under the umbrella of existential nihilism. They're all linked together. So, for example, some of the links we can appreciate. Moral nihilism is the idea that there is no objective reality behind morals, right? There's no objective truth behind morals. Epistemological nihilism sort of suggests the idea that there is no truth or fact. There is no, what you would say, a fact or a truth. It's subjective. It's whatever you want to make it, right? Now you can see the link between epistemological nihilism and moral nihilism. There's crossover, because if there are no truths or facts, well, what does that mean for morals? And there's others that link together as well. But the existential nihilism is of most important significance to us, because it's to do with the self. What is the meaning and purpose of my existence, my life? And this is what the existentialist philosophers really focused in on. Now, here's the issue. We live in times of where people generally deny God, and even if they don't deny God, they don't talk about God. God is not a part of, public discourse. It's not something you talk to friends about normally or colleagues about. It's not within our social sphere anymore, right? We live in a highly secularized world. We don't think about the idea of God. Most people don't even believe in God. Most people recognize themselves as atheists and agnostics, especially in the West. Now, if this is the case, guys, as we've seen, godlessness leads to nihilism. This is an inevitable outcome. There is no ultimate meaning to life. Now, why is this a problem? This is one of the things I want to tackle, because someone may turn around and say, well, fine, there is no ultimate, there is no purpose to my life. There is no meaning to my life. That's it. Why is it a problem? Now, here's why I believe it's a problem. Because as human beings, we cannot help but see everything through the lens of meaning. Think about your life. Everything you do in a day, from waking up in the morning to going to sleep at night, we do it with an objective, with meaning, with a purpose. Waking up in the morning, getting out of bed at 9 a.m. as opposed to 10 a.m., having your breakfast, brushing your teeth, walking to work or getting on the bus, doing your work, coming home, having dinner, whatever you do in your daily life, everything we do for with meaning, with a purpose. There is always a reason behind it. When we look at the things in the world around us, we look at things through the lens of meaning. We try to understand and decipher the meaning behind the world around us and things around us. When we make things as human beings, we make things with meaning, with purpose. We can't help but do this. This is a part of our nature as human beings. Then it's natural then to ask the question, what is the meaning of my existence? Why do I exist? What is the ultimate meaning of my existence, my life? This is a natural question. And what's even more interesting is that when one gets to grappling with this question, whatever time that happens in their life, whether it's early or late, when someone gets to that point and they can't find the answer, it doesn't just mean nothing happens. They just can't find the answer. It doesn't stop there. It leads to a lot of anxiety. What's referred to by the philosophers, especially the existentialist philosophers, as existential angst. This type of deep existential anxiety, this deep internal pain. And this is very interesting if you think about it. I don't know exactly why this is the case. Maybe because it's linked to what I've just said in regards to the fact that we perceive and understand the world and everything around us, including ourselves, through the lens of meaning. Maybe this has something to do with it. But when you come to the conclusion that there is no meaning behind my existence, there's no ultimate meaning to my life, that inevitably leads to a lot of existential anxiety and pain and fear. Right? Anyone that's experienced it, you know how difficult that it is. Camus speaks about this, about this fixation that once they get to this question, there's this deep fixation. When one starts to engage with the question of meaning and purpose and to do with their own lives, everything else becomes trivial. Everything else loses meaning. Everything else just almost dims down and loses color. The world around you becomes trivial. Life and life situations become trivial. You go inward and you can't help it but do this. That question becomes the most important thing, and not finding an answer leads to a lot of pain and anxiety. So it's something that needs to be tackled and addressed. And the reality is, because we live in a world which is generally, as a whole, turned away from God, and the mood of the world is godless, like I'm not interested in the question. I'm interested in the material. I'm interested in making my life and making as much as I can of this world. Because we have turned away from God, a lot of people today experience nihilism on some level. But there are lots of patches, that have been put in place, or people have tried to put in place, things to deal with this, what we can refer to as the lanterns, going back to what Nietzsche was saying. Don't we need to light lanterns now? Right? So this is the lanterns, I believe, that people have tried to put into place, realizing and understanding that we live in a godless world, and turning away from God in a way is good for material progress. And that's a whole nother topic we won't get into now, but the video course, if you watch it, we'll get into detail on that there. But they realized that, okay, nihilism is going to be a problem. We can't escape this. Nietzsche predicted this, and we can understand the logic of why this is going to happen. Let's try to patch this. And people have tried to patch this over the decades and centuries. So start with the 19th century existentialists, the existential philosophers. They tried to deal with this meaninglessness, emptiness. How do we deal with this? Many attempts, Jean-Paul Sartre, for example, spoke about taking responsibility, once you come to the realization that life is ultimately meaningless, take responsibility, be a responsible human being. And he just tried to justify this in his own way. But again, it didn't deal with the fundamental issue, which was that ultimately at bottom, there is no ultimate meaning to your life. What he was suggesting you do, and what many of the other existentialist philosophers suggested you do, was acknowledge and realize and come to terms with the fact that there is no ultimate meaning and purpose to life. But then at that point, start making up meaning for yourself. That's what you have to do. You have to give yourself meaning. You have to make it up for yourself. Right? So this was a lantern they tried to light at that point. And it was an interesting one because it caught fire, the lantern, right? It lit up, and it lit up things around them, and it was the best that they had. But I think soon people started to realize, well, one, it's very difficult to, develop a upright moral character in a world which at bottom is meaningless, and in a world where not everyone else around you is not doing that, and in a world where you don't have any intrinsic motivational drive or underlying motivational drive for you to do this, because you live in a world which is without God and without any ultimate meaning. So it was something very difficult. And I think people also realize that this is making things up. As Hamza says, lying to yourself, playing games, essentially. Why live responsibly? Okay, it sounds good. Why not live recklessly instead? And that is how we escape this nihilism. And that is what people have started to do, especially over the past especially the past century. Hedonism, this idea of do whatever you want, go enjoy yourself, have fun, fulfill your desires. This is what life is all about, this YOLO mentality. You only live once. Go and have fun, explore, fulfill your desires, whether they're sexual, whatever they are, just go and do whatever you want. And that's and that worked. Again, that was another lantern that was lit. Yeah, it helped people in the short term. It led to a lot of pleasure, happiness. Most people around us engaging in some, a type of hedonism today. Do whatever you want, and it leads to this short-term spike in pleasure. You may get a dopamine kick, but then afterwards you're left feeling empty again. This again now some of it links to consumerism, and consumerism ties in with hedonism here as well, because consumerism is very interesting from a few different perspectives. But this is another way that human beings, especially in this secular world today, are encouraged to overcome meaninglessness. Is they're told and we're taught that you are to find meaning in the world around you, the acquisition of the world around you. Go and buy whatever you want to buy. Go and amass as much as you can amass, and try to outdo your neighbor. Try to outdo your friends. Try to have a little bit more. This is the world that we live in, and it's interesting because this will suit the agenda, if you like, of some people, because consumerism, is one of the biggest drivers of the economy. It's one of the biggest driving factors of the economy. The consumer society, because the more you buy, the more that means that there is demand. The more products that are produced by businesses grow, more employment grows, more people get jobs. And this inevitably increases the economy, right? So there's another link here as well. But consumerism is another way, and it's a way that's encouraged because of this very reason. This is where you're to find meaning and happiness. And again, consumerism doesn't work, brothers and sisters, because there's a lot of research on this now as well. Tim Kasser, in his book, The High Price of Materialism, highlights, well, how would you say it? There is no link between material possessions and wealth and well-being. To a certain degree, a level, if you have, you may increase in your material items and possessions and the amount of money you have, or how financially secure you are, and that would lead to well-being to a certain degree. But at a certain point, that stops happening. Well-being would level out, and no matter how much more, if you keep getting more and more and more, fixating more and more and becoming more materialistic, your well-being is not going to increase with this. If anything, it starts to dip. That's what they've noticed. It starts to dip off, because the more materialistic you become, the more depressed you become, and the more anxious you become, and it affects your family relationships and ties. It affects your psychology, it affects your self-esteem, because now you start defining yourself through your material possessions. And if you don't have something, well, then you feel really depressed and sad. So it's a really sort of it's a very dangerous thing to engage in, and it's not solving the problem, because it's a temporary patch. You get this momentary state of happiness, and you may become a materialist, as adopt materialism as a way of life, not materialism as the philosophy, which is that you start believing that the purpose of your life and meaning comes to your life through the acquisition of certain things within this world. Right? But when you don't get them, or you can't get them, well, what's going to happen then? And realizing that when you die, you're not going to take any of you with you. Well, what does it then mean in the grand scheme of things? Right? And who told you that is the ultimate meaning of your life? Was that always the ultimate meaning of everyone's life throughout history? Because if you go back 100, 200 years, the things that we have today, most of us have today, were only accessible to the rich and the elite. They weren't accessible to the majority of the world. So what was the meaning of their life then? So, it's a fix. Temporary solution which doesn't work and causes more damage. And then there's different types of escapism, drugs, alcohol, especially amongst the youth, the younger people, partying, drugs, alcohol, they're trying to escape reality. And gaming is another thing today. People, especially youngsters, they're losing themselves. They rather live in a virtual world, right? This virtual sphere, as opposed to living in the real world. And if you look at games, they're designed in a very interesting way. Because all games have levels. You have an objective, you have a purpose within the game, and you have to overcome each level and grow through the game, right? So it's almost like it's a fix. It gives you a dopamine kick because it appeals to your nature as a human being. But it's a game. It's not reality. So and we're trying to run away from reality and just live in these games. And we've seen how attached people become to these games. I've heard there was this crazy story in one of these, I think, Indian newspapers, where apparently this is not an isolated case, where a boy killed his father because he's prevented him from playing the game. One of these games, PUBG, I think it was, this shooting game. He literally killed his father. And these crazy stories like this, right? Because it shows, it's almost like we're vampires, but that are trying to suck meaning from wherever we can get it, right? But we can't find it, and then we're trying to find it in all of these things, but they're not satisfying us. So these are huge problems, and these are the type of solutions that people have tried to propose. These lanterns they've tried to light, but they've gone out. As a lantern is supposed to go out, it's going to go out inevitably. So how is Islam the solution? And I believe Islam is the solution, fundamentally because Islam makes clear to us that there is a creator. You have a creator, Allah. Allah created you. He is one. He created you, but he didn't create you for no reason. He created you for a purpose. So even there, fundamentally, nihilism disappears. Because as we've seen, it's the removal of God as a conception which leads to nihilism. As soon as you bring God back into the picture, nihilism disappears. But what's really interesting is that Islam really fills out, the gaps. It leaves no stone unturned as far as addressing nihilism conclusively and once and for all. Not only does Islam tell us that we have a creator, but Allah informs us that he created us for a very specific purpose. As Allah outlines in the Quran that he did not create us, in the 51st chapter, verse 56, that Allah says, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, that he did not create us for any other reason except to know him and to worship him. This is the purpose of our existence, our lives. This is why we were created, right? So it's clarity now. We know what our purpose is. Not only this, God further outlines in the Quran, for example, in Surah Mulk, chapter 67, verse 2, where God says, and now he specifically is highlighting our existence within this material world, right? Allah says, and he is the one who created death and life in order to test which of us is best in deeds. Right, so we're here in this world. We are going to worship our Creator. That is the objective, but this world is going to present us with challenges. We're going to face hardships. We're going to face trials. We're going to face, difficulties. We're going to be tested. We're going to be tested, right? We're going to have to make choices. And I mean, even if you ask an atheist, I mean, think about life, right? What are we doing every moment of our life? Every moment's a choice. If you think about it, it's a choice that we have to make. So in one way, it's a test. Every moment is a test. We're being tested. What's another thing that's going to be tested is which of us are truthful in the claim that we worship God. I mean, Allah says in the Quran, just because you say you believe, you think you're going to be left alone. No, you're going to be tested. That claim is going to be tested. Do you truly believe? It's easy to say when things are comfortable, but when things get tough, what are you going to do then? Are you going to, come through? Or are you going to turn away at the first sign of a hurdle? So we're going to be tested. This life is a test. Now, further in the Quran, and this is something I'm going to go into a lot more detail in the next session, next week on Saturday, where we really sort of explore further, Nietzsche in particular in his contention to the religious solution, if you like, to nihilism. It's going to be a very interesting session because we're going to look at the idea of true worlds and, why he believed that there weren't an adequate response to nihilism, etc. But we'll cover that then. But then Allah, here, I'm going to mention it here as well. What's important to realize here is that not only does Allah tell us what our purpose is and what our objective is within this world, Allah outlines the link between our existence in this world and the hereafter, right? And this is a very important link, brothers and sisters. I want you to keep this in mind because when we go over next week's session and we see Nietzsche's fundamental problem with the true world solution of religions to nihilism, you will see how Islam, his contention does not apply to Islam. If anything, Islam does away with his issue with the idea of true worlds. But here Allah outlines in the Quran for us very specifically that it's what we do in this world, the actions we do, the choices we make, which have a direct bearing on where we end up in the hereafter. So this life is not the case as in, for example, Christianity, where you believe in the crucifixion of Jesus, that he died for your sins, and you're just now waiting, for your time to come so that you can cross over and go to heaven forever. It's not like that. From our perspective, every moment in this world is going to be accounted for that we live. Every action that we take, every choice that we make, we're going to be accounted for it. So if we do good, we'll be rewarded for that good. If we do bad, we'll be punished for that bad. So essentially what we're doing in this world is like a springboard to the hereafter. We're working here to build what we're going to get there. So there's a very clear and concise link between this life and the hereafter. So this life is extremely meaningful. And like I said, we'll go into a lot more detail in this, in regards to this in the next session. And as for example, as an example, Allah says in the 4th chapter of the Quran, verse 124, and whoever does righteous deeds, whether male or female, while being a believer, those will enter paradise and will not be wronged, even as much as the speck of a date seed. So again, clearly outlining the link between this world and the hereafter. So Islam clarifies, what our purpose is, what we're doing in this world, and how what we do in this world and our time in this world links to where we end up in the hereafter. Very clear, right? So to conclude, and here's something I want us to see today. Mashallah, alhamdulillah, if you guys have read The Divine Reality, and if you haven't, I encourage you to read The Divine Reality. It clearly outlines the strength, the intellectual strength of our deen, our tradition. We don't just say it's, Iman is not just blind faith, right? It's based on something solid. It's something that gives you stability. And if you look at it from an intellectual perspective, we have amazing, powerful arguments, which can lead to the intellectual conviction of a person that Islam is the truth, right? We have the understanding of the fitrah, that the belief in Allah is natural. It's there. You can't run away from it. We've also touched upon this earlier today. But what I want you to do is I want you to look at the strength of Islam from the perspective of utility, how useful it is for human beings. Not only is God not dead, and this is what I want us to understand, but we need to realize that we are dead without God. We can't function. We can't function. If we really understand the predicament of secular modernity, we would realize that we are in desperate need of God and Islam in particular, right? It's the Achilles heel. Nihilism is the Achilles heel of the 21st century, of this modern Western civilization. And there is a lot of patchwork being done to sort of prevent people from completely losing themselves, because it's almost like keep it brushed under the carpet. Your life is ultimately meaningless. Keep it under the carpet. Don't worry about this. You just focus on this life in this world and making, the most of it. But every so often, people over and over again, and especially after COVID, a lot more people have been thinking about the meaning and purpose of their life. And when you engage these questions, brothers and sisters, you will very quickly, the non-Muslim, the one that doesn't believe in God, would very quickly come to the realization that their life is ultimately meaningless. And that's where that black hole opens up and they start falling through that, and there is no end to this pit. And until they find answers, you just can't escape that. You can't run away from that. So people today, the world today is in need of God. Let's be a bit nuanced here. It's important to clarify this as well. One of the things that pushed people away from the idea of God, especially in the 16th and 17th and 18th centuries, was just the way the church implemented itself at the time, and the way it oppressed people, it oppressed free thinking, and so on and so forth, right? Islam never had this issue. Islam encouraged people to engage in the study of this world. Allah throughout the Quran, read the Quran, you see God says, have you not seen the camel and how it's created? Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth, inna fi khalqis samawati wal ardi wa ikhtilafil layli wan nahari la'ayatin li ulil albab. Indeed, in the creation of the heavens and the earth and the alternation of the night and day are signs. There are signs within the physical world. God is encouraging us to study the physical world. What we call today science, essentially, the study of the physical world. Right? Muslims never had this issue, and that's why we saw the amazing development in the sciences, biology, chemistry, medicine, mathematics within the Muslim world. When at the same time in the West, it was in the Dark Ages, and Christianity was, ensuring that no one got away from this. No free thinkers got away and explored and understood the world. How did the European world rediscover the classical tradition? A lot of it came through the Muslims because they preserved the writings of the Greeks. So Islam has a lot to do with the enlightenment that the West experienced in the 18th century. But the issue was, what happened was, because they had, it was almost like a reaction, an adverse reaction. The church was oppressive, therefore God is oppressive, therefore religion as a whole, put it all in the same basket, is oppressive. So let's completely turn away from religion. But what was interesting, they didn't just turn away from religion completely. They took some of the good bits, the ethical and moral foundations. They tried to keep hold of them, although they couldn't account for them anymore. But they tried to keep, because they're necessary to build a civilization. That ethical and moral framework is necessary to build a civilization. However, if you really question it, there is no grounding. There is no objective grounding to ethics and morals. What's right, what's wrong, etc. And we're seeing the degradation of morals within society today. Why? Because, well, fundamentally, we live in a society, a world that doesn't acknowledge God, and therefore there's no anchor. So Islam, it never had this issue. And people need to start discovering Islam today because it has utility for human beings. It provides you with answers to those fundamental questions that you have. And not only this, it allows you, it encourages you to continue to discover, to engage with the physical world, to have your share of the physical world, but within limits, within boundaries, to not lose yourself at the same time. Remind you define yourself through your relationship with your creator, not through your material possessions, although you can have them, but use them as a means to allow you to be grateful to your creator. So there's a beautiful balance here. Islam has a lot to offer the West and just the world as a whole, subhanAllah. And this is something we should think about, especially from a dawah perspective, brothers and sisters. Realize the world that we live in, realize the problems of the world that we live in, and then provide the antidote, the Islamic antidote, to these problems and issues. And nihilism is one of the biggest issues that we're facing today. So I'm going to stop there, inshallah. We'll go to Q&A. Let's open up to question and answers, inshallah. Let's keep that on the screen. Okay. So what I'm gonna do, if you guys have any questions now, put them in the chat section. I'm gonna flick through. I'm gonna flick through the questions that you guys have probably sent in while I was presenting, and see if there's anything there that we could start with. Okay. Assalamu alaikum to everyone that's joined us and is on this live. Mamuna says, from existential nihilism to Islamic theism. Yeah, I mean, that is the solution if only people start to, decide to put away the baggage and start to look into Islam. Okay, let's see. Atheist. MashaAllah, some of you guys have summarized what we were discussing in really nice chunks, MashaAllah. Yes, I think hello is what you're getting at. Is if for atheists there is no meaning to life, this is the only life that they live, then why do they live it, or why do they promote and become proponents of certain ideologies and groups like humanism, for example, right? There's a clear contradiction here. That's something we should ask them, and again I think it's because it's to do with human nature. Instinctually deep down inside we realize that there is good and bad, and Allah mentions this in Surah Shams in the Quran, that He inspired the soul with an understanding of good and bad. So there is a baseline understanding. We know there are certain things that are wrong and certain things that are right, and they recognize this because they're human as well. Just because they deny Allah doesn't mean they're not created by Allah anymore, right? that Allah didn't create them with the nature, and they don't have the fitrah, but they can't account for it. So they're literally expressing a contradiction when they do these things. Okay. Okay, let's see. So hello is mentioning again, mashallah, there's a sort of a continuous battle that seems to be going on within people between the fitrah and their ideologies and worldviews that they hold. Many of them just blame God and say, why? I think, yeah, the problem with evil, it's you know, it's an interesting topic, but obviously I think there's definitely some really good sessions on that on this channel. And maybe even there's definitely something written on this on sapiensinstitute.org. So you can check that out there, inshallah, Sufyan. Okay, let's see. Yeah, mashallah, there's some good discussions that have been going on. Alhamdulillah. Okay, let's go right down to the poem. What do you say when someone says, okay, this is a good question. So, what do you say when someone says, I am spiritual, but why would I need religion? I have an answer, but really want to hear what you would advise. Yeah, you know what, you guys, this is another thing. So this is another lantern that they're trying to light today, which is of this new age spiritualism. There's loads of people that would say they're spiritual, you know, that they practice some sort of spirituality. I think it's referred to as idealism, because a lot of people, they link this with the idea of that consciousness is everything, you know. And so they, as opposed to the materialist that says, look, there's the physical brain that produces consciousness, which is an illusion essentially, and we perceive the world around us. The idealist who turns around, what they say is, well, there's consciousness at base bottom is consciousness, and everything emerges through this consciousness. And some of them even appeal to a core consciousness, right, that everything else is linked to. And they sort of base, and then they bring in some other spiritual ideas and link it to this. I've come across many people like this as well. They believe in sort of consciousness, spirituality, you know, and they say, well, what's the need for religion? That's a good point. But again, if you just claim to be spiritual and say firstly, what does that mean? How do you know, in most cases, these people are redefining what they mean by spirituality, right? They have their own conception of spirituality. Maybe it's a good feeling, or when they're meditating, they consider this to be spiritual. What do you mean by spirituality? That's one thing, right? And the second thing is, well, where did you get these ideas from? You know, in most cases, it stems from one's own understanding or way, something that they want to practice and do. A lot of people link spirituality to meditation these days. A lot of people are starting to meditate, you know, and engage in meditation. This is what people like Sadhguru, for example, you know, they're very clever. They realize the needs or the demand of the world today, which is spirituality without baggage. That's what they want. They want spirituality without God. They want spirituality without submission to a higher being. They want spirituality without order, you know, without dictates, without, you know, to do certain, you know, a way of living. They want to, and you can see where this is stemming from. Because this whole, you know, liberal society, it's all based on, you know, individual liberty. You do what you want to do. You choose to live the way you want to live, as long as you don't harm anyone else in the process. You be your own God, basically. You know, you are your own God. You do what you want to do, and you create your own reality. Okay, and people have become accustomed to this, and they've got a taste for this now. So it's very hard for someone like that and that type of psychology to submit to another being. You know, but at the same time, they realize they need spirituality. So what's the best thing to do? Oh, let's make up our own type of spirituality, which doesn't come with God or religion. You know, let's just, as long as I can get a bit of a dopamine fix and be a part of a community, but at the same time, not have to submit to God. So it's a natural, you can see the natural progression there. So I would just engage with them and say, well, how did you come up with this idea? You know, and what are the basis for this? Because a lot of these new age spiritual movements are based on, you know, the sort of a clustering of loads of different traditions, and a bit of Hinduism, a bit of Buddhism, a bit of this, a bit of that. So they normally make it up themselves. So if it's something you've concocted, well, if you've then given yourself a meaning and told yourself what the meaning of your existence is, well, again, it's what we discussed. no different from the approach of the existentialists, just they slightly package it differently, different packaging. They're making it up for themselves, So how is that your ultimate purpose? How is that the ultimate meaning of your life? It's just something you've made up, so that's how I would address them. A lot of Muslims are fascinated with horoscopes. Yeah, I mean, it's again, I mentioned this earlier. A lot of Muslims, we have issues, man, especially the youth, and we need to really sort of figure things out, because a lot of times we're number one, living no different to the way atheists and people that don't believe in God are living. Number two, we may claim, alhamdulillah, we do, to be Muslim, but at the same time we haven't internalized what Islam is teaching us, and therefore we end up experiencing nihilism. I mean, I know people, like I've spoken to people like this. They are Muslim, but at the same time they're experiencing existential angst, existential anxiety. And well, it's a simple connection there. Well, you haven't understood what the purpose of life is, as Allah has told us. Look, what does it mean to adopt a worldview, a way of life? It means to adhere to that way of life and internalize what it's telling you and its tenets. Now, if you don't do this, or don't make the effort to do this, well, what benefit is it to just have a label? Label means nothing. It's have you internalized? Okay, we're Muslim, but have we really tried to internalize the reality that Allah created us to worship Him? And have we really allowed this to sink into our belief systems, into our psychology, to the point where it's true for us? Because if we have, well, then you won't have that existential anxiety. But if we haven't, then you will have that existential anxiety. So we have to really look inwards and work on these things. And most of us don't. And that's why you have Muslim nihilists, it's a problem. And this is why we have Muslims that are trying to run away from the world and reality and life, as are non-Muslims. But we have the solution. It's just a case of internalizing, making the effort to internalize that reality. Assalamu alaikum wa alaikum salam. So Ahmed says, why Allah in the Quran threatens us with hellfire to become Muslim? God knows millions of methods other than fear of hell to increase followers of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Could you use fear? Well, firstly, I think you're understanding the word choice of words it highlights that I think you're understanding this in the wrong way. Look, first think about our own psychology. Carrot and stick, this is how we work. This is what your boss will do at work, right? If you're not performing, you will get a threat, But in the case of your boss, he's probably looking out for his own interests, right? He's thinking about, if this guy doesn't perform, I'm losing out. He will threaten you, so you start working, So there will be a selfish motive there. But in the case of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, there's no comparison. Allah doesn't need anything, He's free of need, but He created us to worship Him, right? So He wants us to worship Him, because this is how He created us, and He knows our success lies in worshiping Him in this life and in the hereafter. So our psychology is, Allah encourages us in some ways, in positive, in what not threats, for example, in positive ways to do good things so we can attain paradise. Allah describes Jannah for us. So it creates this desire within us to want to attain it. But at the same time, then with some people, they work with stick. They need a bit of a stick sometimes, right? So Allah then gives you that stick. Yeah, and again, what is the objective? Is so that you wake up and don't land yourself in hellfire, essentially, right? It's for your good. This is our psychology. So and Allah does use many different methods in the Quran to encourage us to accept Islam and to follow Islam and to adhere to the truth and to do the best we can. Allah tells us in the Quran, what is He going to get from punishing us, sending us to the fire? Nothing. Allah is not going to benefit from us. There's a narration of the Prophet ﷺ where he said that where he mentions that if all of humanity from the beginning to the end were to gather together and I'm paraphrasing, I may not be getting this fully right, and was to worship Allah in the most perfect manner possible, it won't increase Allah's majesty in the slightest. And if all of humanity was to turn away from this, it wouldn't decrease Allah in any way, shape, or form. Allah is free of need. Allah is ghani. He's free. He's the rich. He doesn't need us, but He created us to worship Him. Worship Him. He wants us to worship him, and therefore the Quran is mercy from Allah. It's guidance for us, to show us the way, make things easy for us. There's encouragement in there, and that encouragement comes in many different ways. And sometimes it comes in the way of warning us of the hellfire, so we don't end up there. It's for, and that there's a mercy in that, brothers and sisters. Something I was thinking about the other day. Barring one surah of the Quran, every single surah starts with Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, right? That Allah is the excessively merciful, the intensely merciful, and Rahman and Rahim have been understood and be detailed by the scholars in many different ways, the understanding of these names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Allah in every single chapter, barring one, is reminding us right in the beginning of His mercy. Right in the beginning of His mercy. His loving mercy, His unconditional loving mercy. And then everything else comes. We continue to read on. Even where the chapters where Allah reminds us of the hellfire, Rahman and Rahim are mentioned in the beginning. It's almost like the beginning, it contextualizes everything else. It's almost like we should read, therefore, everything that follows through the lens of mercy, that this is from the mercy of Allah. This is from the love of Allah. Whatever follows after Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim is from the love of Allah and His mercy. Even the warnings, even the threats, because they benefit us. So we should start seeing this in the right way. Always think good of Allah. We just, our estimations of Allah are always terrible. So how can we respond to atheists when they say they can make their own meaning? Just say, go ahead, go carry on. One thing I would highlight to them is, or ask them, okay, you want to make up meaning. I can do that. You can do that. But what does making up meaning mean? What does making up meaning mean? Ask them this question. You're making something up. You're lying to yourself. There is no, whatever you make up, because atheist A and atheist B may both make up their own meaning, but both of them will make up different meanings. One is not necessarily better than the other in any way, shape, or form, because they're not objective. It's just something they've subjectively come up with. It's their idea. Therefore, intrinsically, it's meaningless, because ultimately on atheism, everything is meaningless. It has no ultimate meaning. So the ideas their brains and meaningless minds come up with are ultimately meaningless. So it's pointless, really. I mean, if you want to do it and it helps you, carry on. Go ahead. Okay, let's see. Game.art says, do you know if modern technology has an effect on God being out of the picture? There's definitely a link, because if we talk about technology, we're talking about the gaming industry, we're talking about television, we're talking about the internet, we're talking about all of the things now that we have digital access to, social media, right? So all of these things ultimately are a form of distraction, are a form of us escaping reality temporarily, right? So ultimately they are having an effect, because we're being occupied by all of these other things and different things continuously. So they're like patches in a way. So yeah, I think it does. Shahjar says, do you think science in this day and age is being used as a religion? If they are ready to bow before science, which has limitations, why don't they acknowledge God, who is transcendental? Yes. Well, your point is right. Science, some atheists may knowingly or unknowingly adopt it as a way of life. Scientism, empiricism. They make science out to be more than science actually is. I don't think they take it as, I don't know if you can call it a religion. But from one perspective, you can, I guess, you could do. I think I put it. Science is their religion, and Dawkins, Harris, Hitchens, all of these guys are their prophets, and Darwin is their god in a way. I think that's one of the ways you can look at this. It's for some people, because but I don't think it's necessarily a religion, but they do make science out to be more than it is. Scientism, for example, this idea which originated amongst the logical positivists in the 1920s in Vienna. They proposed this idea that, look, this method that we refer to as science is the only way to truth. Any other quote unquote truth which may have come via other means or other routes of knowledge we don't consider it. It's either false or it's insignificant. It's not to be paid attention to. What comes from the scientific method is what is true. So, that is, in a way, elevating science and presenting it as something more than it actually is. Very dangerous, Quran stated. Okay. There's some questions which are not related, so I'm not going to answer those. Okay, let's see. Okay, so behind power. So many people don't actually know what really science really is and how it has limitations. They just like using. Yep. This is interesting. Abbas says they use science to find out how they can overcome nihilistic anxiety, e.g., mindfulness, and they're able to keep God out of the picture. So yeah, this is this is a new trend, especially that's emerging. And I think Sam Harris was one of its first proponents. He actually wrote a book on spirituality without God. I think it's called Waking Up. And see, he's clever he's sharp. He knows that there is a spiritual void. By our very nature as human beings, we are spiritual. There's an element of us which requires spirituality. Now, he's trying to fill that gap. Something people like Dawkins, who are more old school, aren't really doing or aren't interested in. There's a very interesting podcast between Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris. And Sam Harris tries to walk him through one of these mindful exercises, and Dawkins really doesn't like it. So he's more old school naturalist type Dawkins, but Sam Harris, he's more in, he's got his finger on the pulse a bit more with, the requirements of the atheist community. And but a lot of atheists, there's many books now that have come out on this, are moving towards this sort of type of spiritualism, atheistic spiritualism. I don't know. And again, I don't know how they make sense of this. I was thinking about this the other day. Well, one of the things they're probably having to do is obviously redefining what they mean by spirituality, because their conception of spirituality has to be one which could be materialistically accounted for. So it has to be within that framework. Now, they may see it like, for them, it may be, okay, if we can get into a certain physical state which releases certain chemicals in our brain, dopamine, serotonin, all of these sort of happy endorphins, etc., and that leads to this feeling of fulfillment and love and happiness. what that spirituality. So they may be redefining it like this. That's a totally different conception of what spirituality would be, how it would be understood traditionally. But so they've redefined it. And again, it's all about pleasure, in a way. It's just pleasure in this world. Okay, spiritual void, let's try to do some meditation, and get that fulfillment. So they're moving towards this, There's another trend, an interesting trend, which is what you're seeing. There's a shift from, there's a lot of interest in people like Jordan Peterson recently, especially over the past, couple of years. And a lot of the atheist community that was predominantly following Dawkins and these guys, the horsemen, are now shifting over slowly to Jordan Peterson. Why? And if you look at Peterson's content, well, what he's focusing on is essentially existentialism. The question of meaning, the question of responsibility, having a purpose, having an objective, all of these things. These are some of the fundamental things he talks about. So people are getting from him what they couldn't get from these naturalist atheists, right? So there's different ways people will continue, like I said, to light lanterns, as we said earlier. These temporary lights which will try to help them deal with these issues, and they'll keep going out, and they'll have to light other ones. And the solution, some people, may Allah guide them. Some people will find the ultimate light. As Allah says, the light, He is the light of the heavens and the earth. And through Allah they will understand, and through Islam in particular they would understand reality. And alhamdulillah, we should be grateful to Allah that He's given us a way of life, not only a way of life which tells us to do certain things which are good for us, but a way of life, a revelation which explains and answers questions for us, fundamental questions that we have as human beings. That is so powerful, brothers and sisters, wallahi. There are people out there that are desperate for these answers. And some of these people never come across these answers in their entire lifetime. But many of you here right now have got these answers. You found these answers. So be grateful. And one of the ways of really showing gratitude is now share these with other people. Share the answers. Share how it's the solutions Islam has to the problems that we face today with other people that need these answers, inshallah. So I guess we'll wrap up on there, brothers and sisters. May Allah bless you all. Inshallah, what we'll do is next week we have another session. It's a part 2 of this discussion where we're really going to go into the sort of fodder, if you like, that's been thrown from the other side, from the existentialist atheist side towards the theistic side, as when theists provide a answer to nihilism. We're going to look at how Christianity and other traditions try to address the problem of nihilism, referring or appealing to true worlds, as Nietzsche called them, true worlds. And we're going to look at his critique of the true worlds, in particular the Christian conception of the true world. And then we're going to see how Islam breaks down that critique, and how Islam's conception, if you want to call it, of the true world is so profound, and so complete, that that if Nietzsche understood it and had studied it, I believe he may have become a Muslim. I really believe he may have become, because he had some favorable views in regards to Islam. I don't think he looked into Islam's true world conception, because he wrote a lot on true worlds, and he would have said something if he had, but I don't think he did. And even Iqbal, Muhammad Iqbal, in his Javednama, he was someone that really studied Nietzsche to in depth, there's a lot of similarity between the conceptions between Nietzsche's Übermensch and Iqbal's concept of the Marde Mu'min, the perfect believer, the perfect man. So there's he said he mentioned that if Nietzsche something along the lines of, if Nietzsche had lived at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, he would have become Muslim. And if he had lived at the time of Iqbal would have shown him the glory of God. We'll discuss this next week, inshallah. It's going to be an interesting topic. So join us next Saturday, inshallah, same time, 6 p.m. May Allah bless you guys, and I will speak to you guys soon. Assalamu alaikum.